celebrate all non-governmental organizations. When we talk about NGOs, I just explained what it is, non-governmental organizations. And talking about that, now it was birthed as far as 1945 when there was the creation of the UN, and NGO has come to stay. Now the name signifies that it is not being funded by the government, however, is there to be funded by the UN or other individuals who want to help the society. Let's take a look at this video. When we come back, we'll talk to some people who are in the society to help with their NGOs. Do stay.
Welcome to today's event, celebrating World NGO Day.
NGOs are a necessary part of the landscape today.
World NGO Day is observed
they have made the world a better place. When we go to the rural areas especially, and you see the work that is being done by these non-governmental organizations, you will be wowed, trust me, because where the government hasn't been able to reach, they have made sure they have reached there. And today, I have two guests here, and I'm excited because we've been able to pull the country director of Action Aid to the studio. He's in the person of Mr. John Kanko. Good morning, Mr. John Kanko.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Thank you very much, and it's always a privilege to be in your studios, and most especially to engage with your diverse stakeholders in terms of sharing ideas, learning together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here one more time. And my next guest is Mary Tobin Osei. She is the CEO, the managing consultant of Kanko Associates, and also the founder and executive director of Sustainable Development Alliance, that's SUSDA. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm loving your dress.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for making time to be here this morning.
You're welcome.
Now, there are people out there who have heard about NGO, and they will say, okay, why should I start an NGO, or why should I go into a non-governmental institution? Let me start with you, Mr. Kanko. Why did you decide to join a non-governmental organization?
Yeah, thank you very much. That goes more into my inspiration and passion as far as working in the development organization is concerned. Growing as a young person in the northernmost part of Ghana, in a community called Garu, it sits at the top there. It's almost sharing boundaries with Togo. We have also had an experience of limited development infrastructure. And I can tell you that I was one of the persons who sat on stones, or if you like, blocks, that cement pieces of blocks that I used to build houses, to learn in classes. I've had the experience of lying on the bare floor to learning in schools with our textbooks. And what that meant was that it created opportunities for us to continue to ask ourselves many questions regarding the distribution of resources across the country. We also, along the line, growing up to the level of those days we call it secondary schools, we had the opportunity to see development actors, such as people working in NGOs, come to the communities, riding motorbikes, mostly in new cars, and engaging communities and bringing about some forms of infrastructure, such as the provision of furniture in schools. Textbooks, I remember we had an NGO that connected our school, Garu Primary, with a school in the Netherlands. And that was the first time we had a lot of play hooks for playing, textbooks, mostly drawing books and things like that, pencils, pens. And that created a lot of questions around my head regarding if I got the opportunity to work in these places, I would have first-hand opportunity to see how, first and foremost, to brighten my horizon, but more importantly, attract development opportunities to my communities. And that led me from childhood to constantly keep saying, I want to be a social doctor. And so after graduating from the university, I thought it was increasingly important to go back to Northern Ghana. And so when I was in the final year in Legon, I constantly told people that I'm going back to the North to work in NGOs sector. And they kept saying that, but you have just first degree. How do you think that you can get in there? Mm-hmm. Because it's usually reserved for second degree holders. And so I told them that, well, it's my passion. I'm going to go and start irrespective of the level. And so I started as a project officer and systematically grew within the ranks. And that has taken me to where I am today. And so I'm so passionate about development work.
Wow. I mean, hearing your story actually gives us goosebumps. Mary, what about you?
Well, I unlike him, grew up here in Accra, but in a very, very deprived area. I grew up in Accra Newtown, where we saw wealth all around, in Accra, but then there were people in the city who were very, very deprived. And so I had a passion to help the poor and to get them also to come to the level where they can enjoy life. And I particularly have been passionate about injustice and inequalities, especially about women. How many girls are deprived, especially when I was growing, many girls were deprived from going to school because they were girls. And there were a lot of things that went against girls and other vulnerable people. So, and I knew that if I worked in the government sector, yes, I could do something, or I worked in the private sector, I could do something, but I saw NGOs mainly working against injustice, trying to promote equality. And I had the privilege of having a big brother who was working in the sector, and we normally talked about it, and I got inspired. Okay. And so that is what brought me into the sector.
So how long have you been doing this?
I've been in the sector for nearly 30 years.
Wow. Now, I know that, it hasn't been rosy, but of course, you've been able to stand to those challenges. We'll talk about the difficult times, but let's also talk especially about what you've been able to achieve so far, in trying to prevent this injustice and trying to put more girls in schools.
Well, I have had the opportunity to work with organizations that are into promoting equality, not just for girls, but also for other vulnerable groups. So vulnerable groups like people with disability, people who live in deprived areas, slum communities. And we have worked on street children, getting some street children to be reconnected to their parents and giving them a home, because naturally, every child should grow in a home. So I have had the opportunity of helping with that. I've also worked in areas where we have helped young people stay away from marriage, young girls, who are married so young, and because of the early marriage, get deprived of education. And so, and I'm still working and also supporting with the environment now. Now my projects, my organization is doing a lot of work in the environmental sector, promoting sustainable, environment, and supporting young people to be conscious about climate change and its effects on our environment.
Right. Now, John, for Action Aid, people have heard a lot about Action Aid. The name out there is very popular, but the projects that Action Aid embarks on, what are they?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope I will not be blowing my horn so much, but Action Aid, as you rightly pointed out, has been in Ghana's development landscape for over 30 years now. And I must say, it's one of the pioneering non-governmental organizations in Ghana. Action Aid started as a branch of Action Aid UK. And what happened was that it then leveraged resources or development opportunities for the country. That was the days where we had people like Frema, who is currently the, Honorable Frema, who is currently the Chief of Staff of our current government. She played a leading role in terms of attracting development opportunities. And in terms of going straight to the point, what did we do? One of the things we did so well was the provision of educational infrastructure, and particularly in the most deprived communities. So for example, Action Aid, because of the orientation to address issues of poverty, vulnerability, and exclusion, it started in Boku. Currently, you know what is happening in Boku.
Exactly.
But it provided a lot of educational infrastructure. And I dare say that that contributed in bringing some of us up. I mentioned Garu, and Garu was in the then Boku district. It's one of the enclaves.
Is Action Aid still in Boku, looking at what is happening?
Yes, Action Aid is still in Boku. And so what is happening is that we provided a lot of educational infrastructure in terms of model schools. And it's not just a school infrastructure. Auntie Mary just spoke about issues about women. Action Aid is one of the organizations that is women-focused. As a matter of fact, about 70 to 90% of our interventions are geared towards addressing issues of women, vulnerabilities of women, women's access to education. And all these are related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as far as we are concerned, we started with the Millennium Development Goals, and we are escalating the processes by the distribution of more schools. So we can talk of over 30 brand new schools that have girls' changing rooms, that have libraries. In other words, a lot of ancillary facilities. Hygiene for girl child. We talk about water and sanitation. We put water pumps so that children after, playground and so on can wash their hands. We also go a step further to look at the capacity building of schools. It is insufficient to provide just school infrastructure and leave out the soft touch issues in terms of how teachers can be refreshed, teachers can be retooled, how we could even look at what we call early childhood development. If you look at Ghana's educational structure, early childhood development is relegated for the Department of Social Welfare. And so what that means is that there's the need to constantly bridge the gap by ensuring that a lot more resources go into that. The reason why that is important for Action Aid is women's time. Women spend a lot of time in providing what we call domestic care services. These services are usually not quantified. They are usually not recognized. And so you can hear men say that, oh, but I married you. And then what contribution do you have in the family? We tend to forget that women contribute significantly. And so early childhood development centers, we've constructed about 30 of them. We have supported...
In which areas? Are they in the rural areas or in the urban areas?
Fantastic. So they are in the rural areas. So for example, Action Aid works in 11 out of the 16 regions. Okay. And so
is it possible for us to mention that?
Yes. Okay. So we talk about the Upper East, Upper West, Northern region, Northeast, Savannah region. We come up to BA. We talk about all the BA regions that have been broken up, Bono East, and so on, Ahafo. Then you come down to Volta. It was Volta region. We now have OT, and Volta region. We are shifting into all that. And what that means is that it gives us a lot of leverage to target the very poor regions. That is, remember I told you that was the focus of Action Aid, to go deep down to the hard-to-reach areas, poverty-stricken areas, and our vision is to contribute towards the eradication of poverty. And you know, we have done that in terms of Ghana by eradicating extreme poverty in these most hard-to-reach communities. And so that is what we do. We also have contributed towards what Mary spoke about, which has to do with violence against women. We have constructed what we call survivor centers in some of the regions. So for example, if you go to Upper West region, we have a survivor center because we realize that issues of violence against women were quite preponderant in that region, leading to some families' breakdown, leading to, there was an issue where one woman was battered, and we had to create a safe haven for the woman. We engaged government institutions such as Department of Social Welfare, the Ghana Police Service, and as we speak, that person was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. We don't celebrate that, but we saw that as a clarion example to demonstrate clearly that issues of extreme violence against, if you like, even violence against women, is a no-go area. And so there are many interventions that we have been doing, including the agriculture sector. And if I want to talk, I may take
I think you might have to get the whole day to talk about all of that. Yes. Now, talking about the NGO again, you know, we all know that it's a non-governmental organization, and there's a lot that you have to put in to be able to achieve what you do. How do you raise your funds? Let me start with you, Mary.
Raising funds in the NGO sector is a big thing, because if you hear all the things we are talking about, all the things John is talking about, it is money. You need money, you need staff, you need a human resource to be able to go there and do the work. You need machines, you need, you know, you need money to even construct all this infrastructure. And so, and no government supports us, especially in Ghana. I know there are places where some governments contribute to their NGOs, but here in Ghana, you would have to raise funds. So there are diverse ways that NGOs raise funds, but the main source of funding is from our development partners, from the donor partners, we call them. And usually they would float a proposal, a call for people to write proposals, and depending on the area, you know, the sector, the NGO would decide to apply or not. And then you go through a whole process of selection and you get selected. But there are other means that now NGOs are raising funds because the donor funding is dwindling. If as a state we are saying that we are going Ghana without aid, you know, we are telling our development partners that we really don't need that support. And so more and more, we are getting less and less funding available
because of the statements Ghana Beyond Aid.
It could be part of it, but it's also because of our rating. Now we say, just using our GDP, we say we are a middle class, a lower middle class income. And a lot of these development partners actually focus on the poorest of the poor. And so if your country is in the middle class, then our focus will shift a bit to the lower, you know, those who don't have money. But the reality is that we are in this middle class because of GDP, and the GDP is calculated with the monies that do not trickle down in this country. So the oil and the gold that pass over our heads, you know, and the poor person in my village does not experience those wealth. But so NGOs are finding diverse ways of raising money, and this includes sometimes doing some social enterprises to make some money, and these monies they are not allowed to spend so long as you reinvest it into the social work that you are doing. It is acceptable. And I know that for Action Aid and the other international NGOs, they have sources, you know, other means. And
yeah,
I'm sure
John will definitely tell us about how they get their funding.
We'll talk about it. Yeah. But for a local NGO like myself, we mainly depend on the donor partners and the international NGOs like ActionAid. If you have the opportunity to partner with them, then the work that they have some funding to do, they give you some to do it at the local level.
Right.
So I'll leave John to add to it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Feli. You know, the issue of fundraising has become challenging in our times, not only for the national NGOs, but even international development organizations. But to go straight to the point, fundraising is given a lot of impetus if you can demonstrate clearly that the previous resources that you have received has been effectively and judiciously utilized to the transformation of lives. So, for example, in ActionAid Ghana, we focus on the community rootedness. We work with communities in terms of the girl child in the community, in terms of the boy child in the community. And so what we are doing, for example, in the case of Ghana's re-entry policy, you know, government of Ghana has an educational policy that emphasizes that under no circumstance should a girl who becomes pregnant be left behind in terms of education. And so these are the soft areas that ActionAid is looking at. So we have been able to reintegrate over 300 girls of similar stature who have gone to give birth. We facilitated processes for them to come back to the schools. We put infrastructure that is friendly to them. We create a friendly school environment that accommodates them. We don't only do that, but we go to the community to ensure that stigmatization of such people that previously led most of them to drop out of school and to move to Accra for Kayaye are addressed. And so some of those resources are what attracts funding for us.
Okay.
So that's one level of the fundraising, which is your resource. The second level has to do with your, in terms of ActionAid, we have what we call sponsored child policy program, where children in most of these vulnerable communities that I spoke about are connected with individual sponsors in Italy, in the UK, in Brazil, in Greece, who are interested in finding out how to support people like us who are lying on our stomachs. As we speak today, there are some schools that children are still sitting in stones.
Yes.
Under such circumstances, we have development-oriented individuals who contribute, pick them, and sponsor them. So that's one level. We have philanthropies who say, look, I have money that I have made out of my fortune over many years, and I want to see how to support poverty, alleviation of poverty in Ghana. Particularly, my interest is in the Bono region, in the Ahafo regions. Can you get a community that has no infrastructure or has a dilapidated school infrastructure? I want my money to go there.
Let me ask you this. Can the individuals write to ActionAid that they need funding or they need help, and ActionAid will lend a hand, or ActionAid is the one supposed to identify these areas and go help them?
Fantastic question. But it's both ways. As I speak in my office, I have so many of such letters. And the challenge is, even in the face of limited resources, how then do you prioritize? And that's why we implement what we call regional programs, where we are rooted in the communities. We have staff in the regions who work directly with communities. And so they are able to support us pinpoint the poverty packets where there's high need. And so we prioritize and then do the distribution of resources.
Right. Let me ask you a little bit about the Boku before I move on to Mary.
Right.
You know, you said ActionAid is still in Boku, and looking at what is happening right now, we know the people struggling the most are children and mothers. They are the innocent ones. So currently, what is ActionAid doing to support these ones?
Yeah, so if I may step back a little, ActionAid, as I have indicated earlier on, has a track record in this country. Even the issue of the Boku chieftaincy crisis, you realize that ActionAid was one of the first to intervene because it occurred in our operational area. We established together with West African Network for Peace and so on, GANEP, key stakeholders, the Catholic Secretariat, we formed a formidable peace initiative called the BPI, the Boku Peace Initiative. We have intervened because of causes of the fact that where there are conflicts, it's mostly women and children who are directly impacted. And so that led to the maintenance of some level of peace, but along the line, you know, it degenerated. In terms of what we directly do for women, we focus in creating livelihood security infrastructure for them. One has to do with the education we talk about, where the woman can have a safe place for the child. The woman will have more time. If she's a farmer, she goes to the farm. If she's doing dry season vegetable gardening, she goes to do that, and so on and so forth. And so that's one level, the education. Secondly, in terms of the livelihoods, we have projects that concentrate in supporting women to enhance their livelihood security, as in vegetable production, as in beekeeping, as in mushroom production, and so on and so forth. And we use what we call an integrated development program, where, like Auntie Mary spoke about, you know, in the Upper East, we are also faced with the harsh reality of climate change vulnerabilities. You remember the Bagri Dam. Sometimes in the year, Burkina Faso, due to too much water in their dam, opens it, and all communities along the banks of the White River are flooded. Most of the women from the Boko area, the conflict-related area, are working within the banks. And so how do we secure their security? We work in terms of putting them in groups, promoting VSLA, because we believe that the Chinese proverb that says it's better to teach a person to fish than to give the person a fish is an ideal mantra. And so what we do is to support the women to put up what we call village savings and loans. They raise their own capital. We support them in the distribution and management of those resources. We link them to rural banks. We support them to do all those distributions. And so that continues. Aside that,
right,
the women's psychosocial services are also prioritized because it's a conflict situation. Most of them have trauma. Most of them have mental issues. How do you address that? And so it's a whole set or gamut of integrated development practices, including capacity building, training, putting them in social group, building their social capital. Some of them are coming out as champions, engaged in the peace building efforts, and even their livelihoods are enhanced, the education of their children are enhanced. And so you see education literacy in the Upper East is growing up. We also pride ourselves that we contributed significantly in ensuring educational advancement in the Boko area.
Right. Now, talking about this, we get to know that NGOs have done a lot. But let's talk about how it has helped or contributed in the growth of the nation building, Mary.
With all that has been said, I mean, there's no doubt that NGOs have contributed tremendously to nation building. One, we support in getting government policies to the grassroots. A lot of times, government comes up with policies, and it's people in Accra who have access to television and, you know, have access to the media, the conventional media that hear and even know about it. And there are good policies like the National Health Insurance and other social protection policies that the ones who need it most are those at the grassroots, are those in the rural areas, but they don't get to know. You need an NGO that is based there. And like John said, many NGOs work at the rural areas, and so we give this information to them and help the poor to access some of these policies. NGOs have also contributed tremendously in advocating for the implementation of policies. We know that here in Ghana, we have real good policies, and many of them are not implemented. But sometimes the NGOs engage with government, engage with people in authority to ensure that, one, good policies are put in place, and policies that are not too helpful to our constituents, the poor are our constituents, you know, they are amended to make it suitable for them. And when they are good, we also engage with government to ensure that these policies are implemented and implemented well. And we support the poor in that. So in that sense, we are helping with nation development. And if you talk about all the sectors, the education sector, the health sector, the environment sector, every sector you can talk about, you have people, the NGOs, they are working. So if we talk about improving people's livelihood, making the poor woman get a skill to also do something for herself and earn some income, we are certainly contributing to nation development, helping the environment. So for instance, my organization has a project we call Shiahunu. We are getting young people, children, to be conscious about the deforestation that is going on and the effect of climate change. And so we are getting them to love nature and to love trees. We are getting school children to plant trees. If you see how trees are being cut everywhere in our nation, we are getting young people to plant trees and to nurture them, contributing to government's Green Ghana Day. So on Green Ghana Day, we mobilize school children, got them to plant the trees. And as I speak with you, we are monitoring them. And a child looks at a tree and says, this is my tree, and waters it, and they are sending us videos and pictures of how their trees are growing. So such a child would grow up being conscious about nature, and when they become ministers, they will not go cutting the forest.
Exactly.
I like that. I like that you said it. You know what? We've heard also that, NGOs are non-profitable organizations. And so the question here is, if it's a non-profitable organization, how then do you pay your overheads, John?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Maybe let me just add a little to what he has indicated. So from all that we've been speaking all around, now you've broadened the question. So it's not just about action aid.
Yes.
It's more about NGOs.
Yes.
And so if you look at it, there's they are development actors in their own right, because they contribute significantly in terms of provision of infrastructure across the nation. You talk about schools, you talk about CHIPS compounds, you talk about even the wildlife sector, they are supporting in terms of all that. In addition to that, they also serve as an attraction of foreign direct investment. And so there's a lot of money that comes into Ghana that is not directly through the budget support, but through foreign direct investment, which is also, in the good image of the country for the advancement of the country. Beyond that, we also create platforms for the deepening of democracy. We pride ourselves that Ghana is a growing democracy. We are doing democratic consolidation. The non-governmental organizations are playing a key role. Apart from that, we also hold a lot of public officials accountable. We are addressing the issue of political corruption. And so you can see what is happening across the nation. We contribute towards doing that, and so on and so forth. So let me come back to your question because of time. In terms of our overhead, our direct costs, what we do as a development organization usually is to factor all that.
But is it true? It's a non-profitable organization?
Yes, absolutely. And I will come into another dimension of that later on. So it's non-profitable. We are if you make profit, your board can hold you accountable. If you make profit, your funders can hold. It can even lead to you losing some of your donors.
Why? Because
these are value-based systems. You said you are not governor. You cannot go behind and shift. We call that mission drift. If you can only do mission drift if the board makes that decision to say, look, in the face of the realities of our time, we are no longer able to depend on just donor support. And therefore, there's a need for us to diversify our funding portfolio and ensure that we make some forms of resource recapitalization to be able to fund some of the costs. Then you have legitimacy to do that. Beyond that, you cannot. I did a research during my master's program abroad, and I went to Kenya to do my study there, where I was looking at, how can NGOs diversify their funding pots by becoming a little more economistic. For example, we have a lot of capacity building that we do. We train communities, we improve their capacities to understand policies, as she said, in some areas to train. And so can we maintain some form of minimum charges on that? We have infrastructure like conference rooms. You may be running an event services where you have a conference facility, you do weddings, and so our facilities could equally be open to that. But I'm saying, until your board allows that, comes to a consensus and agrees and approves that, you cannot go out of your way and say because you have a direct cost, you want to go economistic, you have to go commercial. that can lead to the loss of your
donors.
Yeah, donors. Thank you.
Right. So how then do you? Yes, you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say something. Yes, for the bit about making profit. In principle, NGOs are not expected to make profit, but then NGOs are expected to raise funds, to exist and to be operational.
Right.
And for a local national NGO like mine, we have realized that if you depend only, and in the times in which we are, if you depend only on donor funding, you could also get crippled. So we are exploring other innovative ways of raising funds. And some of them is undertaking some social enterprises. So yes, for some smaller NGOs, the boards agree that the situation in which you are, you need to pay your staff. If there is no donor giving you funding, it means you have to collapse. And yet you have constituents, you have good work to do. So we also make funds, through some social enterprises. So what are but the catch is that you cannot use that funding as profit. Yeah. That funding, whatever you make out of it, would have to be reinvested into the social work you do. An example for us, SASDA, is that we take children to eco-tours. So we do ecotourism. Also, still in the spirit of promoting environmental consciousness for children, we take them to Bunsu, and we put a small margin on it. So the transport cost, the feeding cost, the fee at the gate, we put a small margin. And certainly this margin helps us to also pay our staff and to also, keep on doing the good things that we do.
So you can't save as a profit.
No.
It has to go back.
Exactly.
So some of the socio-economic activities that you do to earn some money. Yes, you've spoken about, the children where you have to put on a little token to make some money. What other things you do?
I know that some NGOs do, so for instance, the livelihood activities that we support the poor people to do, sometimes you help them market it. So like the soap making, some bakery, some do consultancies.
Okay.
So you have the resources, and some other bigger NGOs may need your service. You do consultancies, you make some small margin, you incorporate that into your social work.
Right.
And if you have facilities like conference halls, and some do stationary services like printing and other small things. But we also, as we're talking about our fundraising, I must mention the role of the private sector.
Please go ahead.
A lot of private organizations, companies are supporting NGO work now. The challenge is that they are all forming foundations and doing it by themselves. And sometimes you wonder, because there are NGOs that their main role is to do this work, social work. And yet a big company has some corporate social responsibility. They want to help the poor, they want to help girls, they want to do things. And instead of giving the money to some existing NGOs to do, they form a foundation and they do it by themselves. And sometimes there are a bit, challenges. But that's notwithstanding, there are others who are supporting the local NGOs to do the work. So there's a corporate, and there are some Ghanaian philanthropics as well who are also supporting NGO work. Yeah. So all of that put together keep us surviving.
There's a notion, okay, and we want you to clear that notion because it's about time we made people understand that no, NGOs are not really what they think they are. Now there's this notion that most people who are into NGOs are there to enrich themselves. How do you clear that? John, let me start with you.
That's a good one, and I'm happy you have reflected it on this discussion. So if people say NGOs are there to enrich themselves, what does it mean? Is it as in relation to the salaries we make, or is in relation to the donor funds that we take? We have ways by which we divert the resources, or so sometimes I'm just trying to let you understand that even that level of perception is not clarified. People use it as just an a bus, an omnibus, to tag us. But I can tell you, they are the same people who will tell you that I will not want to work in an NGO because they drain your blood.
But the salaries are good, aren't they?
As we speak now, we are having a lot of people resigning from NGOs and going back to public service.
Oh, really?
To teach in the universities, for example, to join Ghana Water and Sewerage Corporation, how do we call it? Limited company.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is that we need to have a clear definition of what we call the enrichment, and then we can have a fair discussion. As I speak now, I don't believe I'm rich. But maybe if you go and pick somebody from the community that I work, they would see that I'm rich because I'm driven by a driver who comes with a Prado. We tend to forget that they I passed through rural communities from the Bunu and so on. So in other words, yes, in terms of salaries, we are a little competitive, but I'm saying we are not even yet there in terms of what people say about salaries. Secondly, in terms of donor funding, I know you know so well that in the current world that we are in, every penny of the donor must be accounted for.
Sure.
Every penny. We have a series of layers of audits. The donors come for verification. The donors will go and look for an external auditor. You have to also look for an external auditor. We have even government tax. GRA comes to look at our tax responsibility.
A non-governmental organization.
Yes.
And it's a non-profit organization.
Yes.
But you're paying taxes.
Yes. You have to, the taxes that you are supposed to pay. But even the taxes.
For the salaries.
But even, Mary, the taxes, if you are not tax exempt, you must pay.
Yeah.
So it's not automatic. You have to apply to GRA to demonstrate. And you see, everything is about justification. To demonstrate that the resources that you are using is directly impacting on the rural communities, is contributing towards government effort, and to that extent, the commissioner looks at the grounds of your justification and may decide to exempt you from what? Payment of some forms of taxes.
Mary, you want to say something?
That is the context in which we operate.
Yes, so I want to say that this time I want to put myself in the donor's shoe, because in my career path, I've had the opportunity to be in that position, giving grants to smaller NGOs and monitoring them. And I want to emphasize on accountability. It's so rigid. You would have to account for every PESWA. There is a percentage, so I'm going to use Star Ghana as a case study.
Okay.
When, before it became a foundation, I was the deputy team leader for Star Ghana. And we gave grants out to hundreds of NGOs, you know, also because we were multi-donor funded, you know, program that was supporting NGOs. And we did quarterly monitoring. So we would go to the field, go to that community you say you are working in, talk to the people, members of that community, check the activities you said you've been doing, check your receipts, and talk to, you know, so there's strict monitoring to ensure that the money you took from us, you are actually using them to do what you said you would do. And there are many, countless times when we've gone out there and we've seen flaws and we've actually cancelled grants. Yes. And even recently on an EU project that ActionAid is also working on, I have the privilege of being a technical assistant on that project. And just last year, we went on a monitoring, checking what the report said one of the organizations have done. And we brought a report saying, no, they have to stop them because what is on paper was not what was on the ground. So if anybody is sitting somewhere thinking that NGO money, you can just get it and spend it and marry more wives, try it.
Well, let me just add quickly.
Please go ahead, John.
That is important we balance it. So as we speak, we are talking about the ideal. You know, from where we sit, our organizations, you know, are a little up there. We also realize that there are some charlatans on the ground that parade themselves as NGOs, have unorthodox ways of raising their resources, because whether we like it or not, there are a lot of funds floating out there internationally. And they are able to collude with some funding organizations for funds to leak to them. In that case, the level of accountabilities are weak. So those people are able to do whatever they want. Like the resource is just like the churches we have today. Some people say pastors are making money and so on.
Are pastors NGOs?
But no, I'm just trying to cite the example.
Right.
That it is the same broad brush that is used. Some pastors are doing a great work, but there can also be some underground that do the same way.
Right.
In NGO sector, we also have some NGOs that might go out of the way and then misuse resources and have weak accountabilities. That is not the same as well-established development organization where you have the board, like Action Aid board have to even go to communities to account for the resources that we are using. If you say you have built a school in a place like Drobo, which didn't have a school, the board will organize and go to the ground to find out whether what the country director and the management said is the case. They interact with traditional authorities and opinion leaders. And so it is not as easy as some people think. Thank you.
I like the clarification right now, because most people were thinking that although it says non-profitable organization, they are making money, and it was a myth. And so I'm happy that you've been able to let us understand that no, you still do not make money in your pocket. You know, you work and you support the community or the society.
Exactly.
Let's talk about what you do. You do a lot. NGOs do a lot. Is this, you know, making the government lazy? Because are you taking, you know, all the work away from the government? You are building the schools, you are building, you know, the boreholes, you are putting these children in the classroom. Is it making the government lazy? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can come.
Go first, John.
My colleague would. And so fantastic point, once again. And, you know, I would not want to entirely accept that. In other words, I have a margin, you know, to accept what you're saying. But to a very large extent, what I said earlier on was that development organizations play a complementary role to government's work. And that's why sometimes we have to be careful. NGOs need to recognize that the work that we are doing is supplementing what government is providing, recognizing that development resources are quite limited. So, for example, if you look at capacity building that we do, government hires teachers, government posts them to schools. In terms of refresher trainings, to be able to retool the teachers to perform excellently, NGOs come in to do trainings. That is complementary. In terms of the school infrastructure that we provide, we go out to look for the resources, come to communities that government resources is yet to reach, to say, okay, government, wait here, we will take care of that. Can you redirect this resource that was coming here to another equally compelling community? So we see the complementary role. But of course, if you look at Ghana's current context as a middle-income country, we are talking about better aid agenda. We are talking about big things. What that means is that government need to be able to be seen doing a lot more to raise resources. As we speak now, we are currently faced with a debt distress as a country. And if you are following and monitoring the media, you would have seen that some of us are busy talking in the media landscape and advocating for debt cancellation. We are being buffeted by this same critique that you are talking. You say, John, why are people doing that? How can government overspend, overborrow? And you people will say private capital should cancel the debt that government owes. But we are saying that in the case of the evolving global context, also juxtaposing that vis-a-vis the fact that the private capital was given based on calculation of risk into the equation. Private creditors have made a lot more profit riding on the back of the government. Therefore, if you want to maintain your intransigent role that government must pay, you are putting a lot of distress on the poor communities that we work with. So we are justifying that based on the fact that there is a social, moral aspect of it where the poor woman in Pasenpe, who is still facing a lot of vulnerabilities at the community in terms of their livelihoods, have to now suffer because of the debt district. In other words, yes, even though we are campaigning for government that is seen that we are making government lazy, we also think that government must be seen to do a lot more in terms of making resources. So, for example, again, we argue in the same context that if you cancel government's debt, don't give government that blank check. Make sure that you put in safeguards, you put in accountability checks, for example, to hold government. You can say, we want our money to be invested in communities to address issues of climate change. We want to see our money going in terms of training women to become economically more productive. Well, I'm a little bit biased for women. Let me be careful. The youth, poultry farming, mushroom farming. How can we look at enterprise development? Because the white-collar jobs are now choked. And so we should be looking more in terms of opening up systems, youth employment, enterprise skills, agriculture as a business, working within the agriculture value chains to ensure that if they produce mushroom, for example, they should have a market to sell the mushroom. They should have processing facilities to process the mushroom so we can export it. We are talking about integrated value chain, livelihood security promotion, embedded in gender equality and equity promotion, so that, you see, the population of women in this country is more than men.
Yes.
And so, if we can target women and make them a lot more economically productive, we would earn a lot more taxes, even in terms of taxing their resources, and that contributes towards creating a pool of resources that Ghana can use. Sorry, that is a passionate area.
I just realized that. Yeah, Mary wants to say something.
I just want to add a bit onto the fact that it is a complementary work. You know, the NGOs really, we complement what government does. So if an NGO goes to build an infrastructure, a school building in a rural community, the NGO does not continue to employ teachers there. It's the government that brings teachers and pays the teachers and makes sure that the school functions. So we play a complementary role. In the early 90s, 80s, 90s, as I started my career in the NGO sector, it was more of service provision. Yeah. The Action Aids and the Plan Ghana's and the big guys were building schools and hospitals and giving wheat and giving oil and, you know, giving to the poor. And then we came to an era where we shifted from the service provision to the using the rights-based approach to development. And we make a lot of noise about rights-based approach to development, where we said, whatever you give to the poor or whatever you do, you should use the lens of human rights. Right. So you're not giving because you want to give, but because the people have the right to. And in that times, we empowered the rural community, we empowered citizens to engage with government. And the idea was that don't take the role of government as NGO, but empower, demand that accountability from government. So we empowered rural community. I remember we had very exciting times having women's group and community-based organizations engaging with the district assembly for light and for water and a lot of them, because we gave them the skills and how to do it, the lobbying skills and the negotiation skills. They could get some, you know, government do some of the things they wanted. But later, as time goes, we realize that yes, they are demanding. The people are empowered, they have the voice, they are advocating, but government doesn't have the resources. They just cannot give them. And so we are actually at a point in the NGO sector where we are blending the two. We are empowering citizens to demand accountability. Right. Demand that we are involved in the district development planning. On an Action Aid work that I monitored recently, they are getting the women's group to participate in the district development planning work. You know, so get us involved, do what we want, because it is our money that is coming. But we realized that we need to still complement that with some of the service provision, because government doesn't have it all. So at this point, we are doing the empowerment and the demanding, but we are also providing service so that we can have the poor at least free a bit.
Yeah. Now the NGO has done a lot, and today we celebrate all NGOs out there. What keeps you going?
It is the joy of seeing that poor woman who could not afford a 3-square meal now have her vegetable garden and pride herself to say that I can save this amount every week because of the support that you give me. It is that joy of seeing that little girl who would have stopped going to school because of pregnancy now go back to school and still be happy to finish her school. It is that joy to see that young person who would have just come to Accra roaming about now doing something productive with their lives. So seeing some justice in the system, seeing the poor at least also have some relief is our joy.
John, same with you?
Great. So in addition to it's also that joy to see a young man who would have been in the street selling dog chains, engaged in poultry farming, and can make about 20,000 in a year as income. And you can see the joy that they can marry, they can have good weddings, invest in Ghana. But beyond that, let me touch at the macro level. It is also that joy seeing that NGOs are working to complement government effort to consolidate our democracy. We as Ghanaians have agreed that the pathway for our development is democracy. And so, how do we day in, day out preach the gospel, build capacities at the community, let the youth know that we can only change our government through the tongue? And how can we constantly improve our electoral systems? How can we constantly, even at the decentralization system that we selected, to ensure that we are empowering community people to understand the rights-based approach and want to be able to participate in district assembly elections, hold their DCEs accountable in terms of the resources that come to the district, how it's equitably distributed, how it promotes women equality, how it advances youth development, how it helps to prevent violent extremism, whether we like it or not. You see, our borders are being encroached by violent extremists. We must not continue to boast that we are an oasis of peace. Everybody has to participate in this direction. And let us also strengthen our active citizenship to know that voting is the pathway that we have selected. They are legitimate means by which we can change government. We should play by the rule of law in this country. Thank
you so much for being here today. We are super grateful, and congratulations once again. We celebrate all NGOs out there today. My guests for today have been John Kanko, who is a country director for Action Aid, and Mary Tobin Osei, who is a CEO and managing consultant of Kanko Associates, and also the founder and executive director of Sustainable Development Alliance, SUSDA. Of course, there are people that you want to celebrate today. So John, who do you want to celebrate today?
Yeah, for today, I want to celebrate my board chair, Nana Yao Ochre Duache, who has given me a lot of support in terms of rallying the board to be able to give me the support to do the life-changing things we are doing. So without the board, there's no way I can achieve what we are achieving. But more importantly, equally, is to thank our donors, the European Union, the Norwegian Development Corporation. We have so many. For example, they are helping us to go into what we call combating modern slavery. Women contracts are being affected day in, day out. They are being deprived of what is due them. They are exploited at the workplace. Who is speaking for them? Issues of alleged witchcraft. Another time we'll talk about that.
We have to talk about that.
And so we need to look at
the
all
witch
that.
camp.
Yes.
Yes. And Mary, who do you celebrate today?
I have a lot of people to celebrate. I want to celebrate my big brother, Tony Dogbe. He is now the country director of SEBA. And he was my inspiration to come into the sector.
Right.
And I started my career with a company that's a consultant firm that he was running. And in fact, he mentored me. Tony, thank you. And then I also want to celebrate my team, especially Henry Amponsa, who is my direct assistant. He's been such a support. And all the people who help us do what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria and John, and do have a fantastic day. To you who stay glued to your television set, thank you. We are not done, because coming up next is A Woman in Business. And after that, we'll bring you away some entertainment. Do stay with us. My name is Rosalie Felly.